At 35 miles per hour in the black winter off Alaska, the USS Carl Vinson plowed into 50-knot winds. The flight deck was glassed with ice, the North Pacific heaved in gray walls, and an F-14 Tomcat skated a heartbeat from the edge. On the bridge, the choice was brutal and simple: slow down and risk the mission, or hold speed and bet thousands of lives on skill, steel, and teamwork. They chose speed. What followed was not luck. It was seamanship, training, and a choreography of decisions measured in seconds. In this world, heavy weather isn't a footnote, it's a constant adversary. 2 generations earlier, Admiral William "Bull" Halsey's fleet learned that lesson the hardest way when 3 destroyers, USS Hull, USS Spence, and USS Monaghan, capsized in a 1944 typhoon, taking nearly every soul aboard. Aircraft carriers survived because their crews understood the ocean's violence and how to meet it. Fast forward to November 29, 2022, a single rogue wave killed a passenger aboard the Viking Polaris while the ship was making a fraction of carrier speed. Now imagine a 100,000-ton carrier hitting a wave like that at over 30 miles per hour with a floating city of 5,000 aboard. That nightmare scenario is the reality carrier crews plan for, train for, and routinely overcome. This is how they do it. Why slowing down isn't always an option. For civilians, the instinct is obvious. Storms mean slow down or shelter. For carriers, speed is often the safer choice and sometimes the only choice. Mission windows are unforgiving. Recovery cycles, launch times, rendezvous points, and fuel states for returning jets dictate timelines measured to the minute. Strategic urgency compounds everything. Humanitarian crises, deterrence patrols, combat sorties. The sea doesn't wait. Neither does the mission. During Desert Storm, the USS Nimitz drove through 25-foot seas while keeping launch and recovery cycles on schedule. At maximum sprint, nuclear carriers can exceed 30 knots, more than 35 miles per hour. That number looks mundane on paper until you factor in a 60-foot wave. The impact loads scale with mass and speed. A 100,000-ton ship meeting a moving wall of water is like a city block colliding with a freight train. Slowing too much can be just as dangerous. Steering becomes sluggish, the bow can fall off the seas, and the ship risks taking green water over the deck at the worst moment. High-speed, heavy weather operations are therefore a knife-edge calculus. Keep enough speed for control and mission timing, shed just enough for survivability. The art lives in the details. Split-second decisions at the edge of control. When the seas turn steep and confused, the bridge becomes a cockpit. The officer of the deck, OOD, orchestrates a ballet of inputs: radar wave plots, wind vectors, swell period, ship motion data, and the visual read of the ocean's surface. The quartermaster tracks heights and intervals, calling updates in a metronome rhythm. The helmsman battles the bow's tendency to slam, hunts for the sweet angle into the seas, and holds a course that is never quite straight. Veterans liken it to wave riding. Speed increases just before the smaller sets. Power eases ahead of the big ones to keep the bow from burying deep. A half knot here, a degree of rudder there. It's microsurgery at city bus momentum. Communication is clipped and crisp. The OOD's call, standby for impact, means bodies brace, eyes lock on gauges, and hands stay light. The ship must slice, not punch. Modern carriers are optimized to cut through, not float over wave faces. That knife bow throws green water across the foredeck. Anything unsecured becomes a projectile. Within seconds, topside teams lash, cinch, and clear. They always assume the next set could be worse because it often is. Flight deck heroes. At 30 knots in heavy seas, the most dangerous square footage on Earth might be the last 600 feet of carrier deck. Picture a landing area that plunges and rises by tens of feet in seconds, slicked with spray with the ship surging forward at highway speed. Now add a 40,000-pound fighter jet descending at 150 miles per hour with a hook and a prayer. Landing signal officers stand exposed a few steps from the box, reading the meatball, an optical glide slope indicator, and the deck's violent rhythm. Their voice is the last thing a pilot hears before touchdown. Power. Hold it. Come left. Roger ball. In heavy weather, LSOs work the technique known as deck motion compensation, coaching not to where the deck is, but where it will be in the instant of contact. The margin for error is razor thin. A late correction by a fraction of a second can mean a bolter, missed wire, or worse. Around them, yellow shirt directors, purple shirt fueling crews, red shirt ordnancemen, and brown shirt plane captains move like a pit crew on a trampoline, each action timed to the wave sets. Below the deck, arresting gear operators adjust engine settings to account for deck heave and aircraft weight, turning raw physics into a safe stop in less space than a short city block. It's one thing to do this in calm water, it's another to do it while the ship is effectively surfing mountains. Engine room warriors, buried deep in steel corridors where the ocean's voice is a relentless thunder. Reactor operators and engineering crews fight a different battle. To keep a carrier driving through heavy weather, nuclear plants must hold steady output against shifting demands. The ship flexes, pipes and machinery feel the slam of wave impacts as low-frequency shudders, yet the power must be smooth. Catapult systems need precise steam pressures. Propulsion responds to throttle commands that are hair-fine but consequential. Here, checklists are creed and redundancy is religion. Control rod positions, coolant flow rates, and turbine speeds get micro-tuned to keep the plant responsive without flirting with trips. The worst sin is a loss of propulsion in bad seas. Without way on, the ship is at the mercy of the waves. Engineering teams train for that nightmare, and for the averted ones no one hears about because the numbers stayed in the green. Plotting survival at 35 miles per hour, navigation under heavy weather is half meteorology, half chess. Quartermasters and weather specialists build a dynamic picture from satellite feeds, buoy reports, model outputs, and real-time sensor data. They search for windows, transient lulls in wave height, or beneficial swell angles, then thread the ship through before the window closes. Sometimes that means adding 200 miles to the track to avoid a system that will only strengthen. At 30 knots, that detour can be 7 hours, far better than days lost to damage or flight deck shutdowns. The map on the chart table is a negotiation between physics and purpose, what the sea will allow versus what the mission demands. In the worst hours, updates hit the bridge every 30 minutes, and the plotted line looks less like a ruler stroke and more like a heartbeat. Heavy weather is never static. A carrier can outrun its own forecast. That's why nav teams constantly iterate, turning the future from a fog of probabilities into a path of hard choices, coordinating chaos. When the horizon disappears behind blowing spindrift and the deck is a world of noise, communication becomes survival. Radio rooms juggle high-frequency propagation that bends and fades during storms, satellite links that drop at the worst moment, and interference that chews the edges off critical instructions. The answer is layers. VHF, UHF, HF, SATCOM, data links, even flashing light if needed. Backups for the backups isn't a cliche, it's a workflow. Air traffic controllers in PryFly, primary flight control, talk pilots down to a moving postage stamp while the ship yaws, pitches, and heaves. The lexicon is paired to essential words, the cadence calm by force of habit. Communication failures cost time, time costs fuel, fuel costs options, and options are everything when a storm closes in. Surgery during an earthquake. No plan survives the sea. In the worst moments, damage control teams sprint toward the sound of rushing water while the deck heaves underfoot. Hull techs weld and shore, dewater and brace, slamming steel against steel to keep compartments dry and structure sound. They work with cutting torches and pumps as the ship hammers into the next set. On the flight deck, impact forces can buckle plates or stress catapult tracks. Repairs there happen in the open, under spray that stings like gravel with jets taxiing around the work area. The ship cannot stop. The storm will not pause. DC teams are trained for claustrophobic fires, electrical casualties, and flooding in the dark. Heavy weather compresses all of it into minutes. Controlled violence is the phrase you hear? It fits. Medicine in a liquid earthquake, sick bays on carriers are mini hospitals. In heavy weather at speed, they become trauma centers strapped into a mechanical bull. The most common injuries are fractures, concussions, and lacerations from sudden throws against steel and machinery. Doctors and corpsmen strap patients, stabilize necks, and run IVs while cabinets rattle and lights sway. In the rare, worst cases, emergency surgery underway, the surgeon's hands become both scalpel and gyroscope, finding stillness inside motion. It's not dramatic for drama's sake, it's what it takes to keep a city alive when the ground itself won't hold still. Combat speed in monster seas. The Gulf War's USS Midway maintained 30 knots through 25-foot seas while launching and recovering around the clock. Every case study since reads the same. Speed demanded by mission, motion demanded by weather, safety carved from the overlap. By skill, the tempo forces a mindset. Assume the deck will do something different a second from now and be ready when it does. Pilot's time approaches to catch the deck on the rise, not the fall. Catapult crews watch pressures and cues like a symphony's percussionists. Arresting engines breathe in and out with each trap. The system works because every link understands its place and the consequences of seconds lost. The technology that buys seconds. If seamanship is art, technology is the extra brush. Modern carriers rely on a suite of systems built specifically for heavy weather high-speed ops. Improved Fresnel lens, optical landing system, IFLOLS. Stabilized optics give pilots a glide path cue that compensates for deck motion, shrinking the mental math in a turbulent approach. Enhanced weather routing. Software digests thousands of data points to forecast wave height and direction along multiple candidate tracks, arming nav teams with options and probabilities. Deck motion, sensing and compensation, arresting gear and catapult control systems integrate motion data to fine-tune settings in real time. Rogue wave prediction. Research. Emerging tools, some born in academia, aim to spot dangerous wave sets minutes before impact, just enough time to adjust heading or throttle to blunt the blow. None of it replaces judgment. All of it buys breathing room, training for the impossible, and mastery in chaos is learned in calm. Heavy weather training starts in classrooms and simulators, where bridge teams face programmed seas that punish sloppy timing and reward smooth coordination. Pry Fly rehearses recovery cycles over decks that lurch and jump on screens, and then on steel. Damage control teams run wet drills in mock compartments with blackout conditions and slosh tanks that simulate the ship's roll. The curriculum is ruthless about realism, miscommunications, cascading failures, simultaneous casualties. Muscle memory, they say, is built one repetition past comfortable. The first time a helmsman feels the rudder bite at the edge of control should never be in the real thing. So it isn't. Lessons from near disasters. Every close call becomes doctrine. After aircraft were nearly swept from a windy deck in the 1980s, tie-down procedures grew teeth, more chains, higher ratings, stricter checks. A rogue wave that battered a bow at speed led to reinforced practices for closing and dogging hatches and for flood boundaries that resist the first and survive the second hit. The Navy's culture of mishap lessons learned is unglamorous and relentless, 1,000 small changes that add up to ships that come home. Fatigue, focus, and the thin edge. Operating at combat speed in heavy seas wears the mind before the muscles. Sleep becomes a fragile currency, broken by impacts that boom through steel. Reaction times lengthen. Decision fatigue creeps in. Good commands plan for that. Shorter watches, fresh eyes in key seats, hot food at odd hours, coffee at all hours. Even then, there are limits. A bad storm doesn't care that the last one ended yesterday. Yet, day after day, crews hold the line. They trade comfort for cohesion, fear for focus. The ocean learns their names and lets them pass, designing for safer speed. The next generation of carriers and escorts will bring hull forms tuned for reduced slamming, stabilization systems that damp motion without kneecapping speed, and AI-assisted tools that recommend course/speed combos for the least violent ride consistent with the mission. Virtual and mixed reality training will refly specific historic storms, letting new crews practice the exact decisions their predecessors survived. Technology will never make the sea gentle. It can make the ride less murderous. The unsung heroes who keep the city alive. When the deck pitches 30 degrees and chain lashings sing, heroism doesn't wear only green jerseys and flight helmets. It wears aprons, headset muffs, and mailroom keys. Mess specialists serve hot meals to seasick crews and exhausted teams because calories and warmth are morale's foundation. Postal clerks move letters that break the storm's isolation. Supply sailors inventory parts that will be needed at 0300 when something finally shakes loose. These admins push orders through so a repair part is waiting at the next replenishment. In combat or in a gale, the operational edge is human. The edge is everywhere. Why carriers rarely lose to weather? No American aircraft carrier has been lost to heavy weather. That isn't an accident or an invincibility myth. It's the sum of design margins, conservative engineering, obsessive training, gritty experience, ruthless self-critique, and a culture that treats the ocean like an opponent worth respecting. The ships are tough. The procedures are tougher. The people are toughest of all. When the nation calls for speed through bad water to meet a crisis, carriers go, because carriers can, and because crews have turned the impossible into a practiced craft. Speed, nerve, and the American way of seamanship. The next time you see footage of a carrier launching jets into a gray squall, remember the invisible decisions inside that frame. The OOD trimming speed before a braking set, the helmsman finding purchase in a cross sea, the LSO's voice steady over the roar, the reactor operator nudging a control rod, the damage controlman cinching a shoring timber tight. Remember the cook serving at midnight, and the radio man coaxing life from a stubborn link? All of them are why a 100,000-ton city can sprint into weather that would sideline lesser ships and still hit its time on target. Monsters live on the ocean. American carriers don't pretend otherwise, they meet them at speed. If this look inside high-speed, heavy weather ops gave you a new respect for the sailors who make it possible, help keep stories like this afloat, hit like, subscribe, and share so more people can see the skill, grit, and teamwork behind those dramatic clips on the evening news. Thank you for watching and see you next time.